I don't want no oil spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo and Bowling Green. Good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I am here with my wonderful co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together, Rebecca and I, here on October 27th, 2024, we're going to make a wonderful show for you called For a Green Future. And For a Green Future is the show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your families, and the trees that are all finally losing their leaves and changing colors out here in Northwest Ohio, and the bugs that are going to lay their eggs in those leaves, and the birds that are hanging out for the winter or heading out for the south, and basically everyone and everything, because, like it or not, all of us are wrapped up together on this wonderful planet called Earth. And we have a really interesting show lined up for you today. We're going to chat for the next 10 minutes or so. We're going to be talking a little bit about the presidential election, and I have a news scoop here, which a little bit of information you're not going to get anywhere else on that presidential election. And so this is the show, because we don't generally talk about politics as such on this show. We like to focus on ecology and the environment, but we're going to look at the presidential candidates in terms of their positions on ecology and the environment. So you could feel free to join us at any time during the show at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. After we talk about the election, we're going to have an interview, a very nice interview, with our special guest, Dr. Eliot Jacobson. And he is somebody with a massive following on X, and he does these amazing graphs that just show how climate change is happening and how fast it's happening. And he's been on a lot of national shows. He's been on CNN, and because his grasp of what's going on and his ability to show it clearly in graphs and graphics is just kind of unmatched. Then it's our advertisers and patrons, and then it's Rebecca. And Rebecca, what will you be talking to us about today?
Bats, because they're scary, allegedly.
Scary bats.
Especially if you're an insect.
Right. So, okay. Then it's ecological news, and we've got some really interesting ecological news. Again, some of which is being completely ignored by the mainstream media. Some interesting stuff that we are working on. And hopefully, like I said, we'll hear from you at some point during the show. So this is the best show in Northwest Ohio, but it gets better every time you call. So the presidential election. A few weeks back, we talked to Chase Oliver. He's the presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. And what we did was we sent exactly the same invitation to all four of the major candidates, Chase Oliver, Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris, and he was the only one that got back to us, sadly. So,
Also, I think he liked a picture of my dog this week or something.
oh, really? He's followed
Yeah.
you on Facebook now?
Apparently. Yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
So we know he has good judgment.
So if you want to know his position, go back to that previous episode where we had a 15-minute interview with him, which, as I say, in the interest of fairness, that opportunity was available to all the candidates. But since most of them didn't take us up on it, we're going to review really quick what they are saying. And we're going to start with Donald J. Trump, and we're going to basically zip through this pretty quickly because he is just like literally the worst possible candidate. He denies global warming exists. His policy on global warming is to make it worse. We got to drill more, he says, put more gas and oil out into the atmosphere. He had an infamous meeting back in April of this year with 20 executives of the largest oil companies in the world, and he said to them, "Give me $1 billion, and I will eliminate all environmental regulations on oil and gas drilling." And he hasn't received $1 billion from them, but they have ponied up 14.1 million, which is actually his fourth largest source of campaign contributions. So they didn't, they didn't give him $1 billion, but they did throw him something. And so we also have his 4 years of presidency to judge what he's going to do with the environment, which is a much more accurate assessment than what he says he's going to do. And he used COVID as an excuse. He called it an emergency, and he used COVID to suspend all environmental laws, all federal environmental regulations while he was in office, which is, kind of, you almost have to admire it that on the one hand, he was denying COVID was causing problems to the country, but on the other hand, he was like, oh, it's an emergency. We can't enforce any environmental regulations.
Do we actually have to? Because that's going to be a stretch for me.
Have to what? Enforce?
Do we have to admire him?
No, we do not have to admire him. I said you'd almost have to admire him.
No,
Yeah,
I'm
but
not even an almost.
Don't even cross that
Not
line.
even close.
Okay. Now he says he wants clean air and water, but he doesn't actually say how you can get clean air and water without having any environmental regulations or enforcement. And then, so of course, he also, while he was president, he withdrew from the Paris Accords, which, weak as they are, is the Earth's only governmental response to global warming right now. And so he pulled out of that, which, so there's Trump. So then that brings us to Harris and Kamala Harris, and she does admit global warming is real. Her website says people should live free from the pollution that causes global warming. And while she was previous to running for president, she was much more pro-environment. She, for example, at one point, she used to oppose fracking. Now she actually bragged about the fact that the U.S. is the largest exporter of natural gas and that we've expanded our gas and oil drilling during the Biden administration. Biden and Trump both oversaw record increases in oil and gas drilling. So, in other words, Trump had brought us to a record levels, and then Biden has exceeded those record levels. Now, to some degree, that's because of Trump, because he, contracts that were signed and mining and fracking that was planned during the Trump administration has come to fruition in the Biden administration. But Biden has promoted fracking, for example. And they've also, the Biden administration has also supported the false solutions of nuclear power and carbon capture.
I just had some kind of a organizer for a major party coming down my street this week and telling me about how, we need nuclear power, though, and the new ones are much safer.
And the new ones are imaginary. Yes.
Yeah.
I could imagine a nuclear power plant greater than any other, which doesn't pollute the environment with radiation, but that doesn't mean they exist.
See, I'm a pretty imaginative person, but I know the difference, you know?
Good point. Good
I can
point.
distinguish between fantasy and reality
Yeah.
a high percentage of the time.
Now, she did earlier when she was a senator, she signed on to the Democrats' Green New Deal, which was written by AOC, but she did not bring it to fruition. I mean, the Green New Deal, which for the Democrats was to bring us to 100% clean, quote unquote, clean energy by 2030, never made it out of committee. So it's very nice that she signed on to it, but it would have been even nicer if it happened. Now, in the Inflation Reduction Act, which she helped pass, there is $370 billion for wind, solar, and electric vehicles, which is great. And as we've said before on this show, it's time to take advantage of that. You know, if you are looking for a new car, go electric. You get thousands of dollars in tax breaks from it. And, you know, it's also the right time to put solar power panels on your house because, again, there's lots of federal money that will help you do that. So there is a solid promotion of clean energy, wind, solar, but that's, you know, tainted by the also production of more nuclear and more oil and gas. And so it's a mixed bag with Harris, but there's still no question that she's better than Trump.
It seems like a crazy coincidence that, okay, there's, we need this stuff. We need it. And, okay, coincidentally, their approach is also the one that isn't going to do anyone out of any money, any major corporations. Like, okay, but it's scientific. We need this, you know.
Yeah, the oil and gas industry has to die. I mean, there's no question there, ecologically speaking. And there's no mention of that in any of the Democratic Party's campaign stuff. So, but that brings us to our final candidate, Jill Stein. And Jill Stein her policies, were she to get into office, are 100% better than either of the Democrats and like 1,000% better than the Republicans. She created the Green New Deal, actually, and her Green New Deal, the language of it was copied by the Democrats. But basically, she wants to use federal programs, putting people to work, installing and creating wind turbines and solar panels. And so using federal dollars. And as part of that, she wants to have public ownership of energy production and distribution. In other words, no more First Energy Corporation, all energy, electricity supplying all energy supplying companies would be publicly owned. And so then, you know, the people would have a say in how much they charge. For one thing, it would save tons of money because they wouldn't be looking to make profits anymore. And what happens? And she's staunchly anti-nuclear, which is great in a candidate. Now here comes I said I had a scoop on the presidential election here in Ohio. So when you go to the polls, you will see on your machine they've taped little messages saying votes for Jill Stein will not be counted. And full disclosure, I am a Green. You know, I was a member of the Green Party when we had it, and I am still co-chair of the Wood County Green Party. And so I had to figure out what exactly is going on with that. So what exactly is going on with that? As far as I can tell from court records and reporting in places like Cleveland Plain Dealer, Jill Stein got on the ballot. She had collected enough petition signatures, but unfortunately, she used a woman named Anita Rios as a placeholder for her vice presidential candidate, because when they were collecting the signatures, they didn't know who the vice presidential candidate would be. So she succeeded in getting on the ballot, and she was put on the ballot by the Secretary of State as an independent, not as a Green, because she only needed 5,000 signatures instead of 35,000. Then there was a deadline for telling the Secretary of State to switch the vice presidential candidate. So that deadline passed, and 3 weeks later, the co-chair of the Ohio State Green Party sent the Secretary of State a letter saying, take Anita Rios off and put Butch Ware, the actual person who is the vice presidential candidate, on. Now, it was too late to put Butch Ware on, but it was not too late to take Anita off. And so the Secretary of State took that letter, removed Anita, which invalidated Jill Stein's candidacy because you have to have both a president and vice president in Ohio. Now, Anita claims that she did not send that letter and that she had no knowledge that it was happening. In fact, the letter was submitted by the co-chair of the Ohio State Green Party, Felina Farley, and the Secretary of State claims that when she submitted it, even though she admitted to cutting and pasting Anita's signature, so Anita did not sign this letter, and Felina was saying that she had coordinated with Anita, that and the Secretary of State says they had some evidence that there was coordination, like phone logs and stuff, so somebody's not telling the truth here. It's either the Secretary of State or it's Anita or it's Felina. Somebody's not being 100% honest here.
And we do know they've done screwy things with Green Party candidates in the procedural things.
There is a history of that.
Yeah.
So what has happened is the Stein campaign has appealed this, and they'd had a court hearing this past week, basically saying that Felina had no authority to remove Jill Stein from the ticket at all, since she was not part of the Stein campaign. And so odds are good she's going to win her case. The question is it going to happen before the election? The election's going on now. People are already voting. And so it might be that the court will come back in, December and say, oh, yeah, you were right. You should have been on the ballot. But it's a strong case, because if it's allowed to proceed, that means that any bad actor can go to a Secretary of State and say, oh, take this person off or that person and mess up their candidacy. So that's what the situation is. That's why everybody's got these notices. And if you get a paper ballot, you'll get a letter along with it. It's more complicated than what the Secretary of State's saying in those letters and in those notices. But
so
now
in
you
that
know.
situation, what should you do if you want to vote for a candidacy whose inclusion on the ballot is unsure?
Well, what I'm personally doing, all right, and I'm not advocating this, I'm just saying how I'm personally responding to it, is I am waiting to see if the court case reverses the Secretary of State. So that, because I'm not going to vote. If I wanted to vote for Jill Stein, I wouldn't vote on a machine that has a notice saying votes for Jill Stein won't be counted. So I'm waiting to see what happens.
There are also some important issues.
Yes.
Yeah. So
all right, that was our review of the presidential election of 2024. A pretty sad state of affairs. Time to hear our interview of Eliot Jacobson, and I found this interview to be particularly fascinating because this guy is really quite brilliant, and as I say, he's been interviewed many times on national media, so you'll see why. Let's go ahead and hear that interview. Welcome to For a Green Future. Could you just please share with us your name and a little bit about yourself?
My name's Eliot Jacobson, and I am a retired professor of mathematics and computer science. Had a career for a decade in the casino industry, and for the last few years, I've been active with environmental and climate change issues.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I know you're enjoying your retirement, but I also know you're pretty busy. You've got 80,000 followers on X there, and I think one of the reasons that so many people follow you, I know one of the reasons I follow you, is that you have a real skill of taking all this data, all this raw data, and presenting it in a really coherent, really striking manner in terms of your graphs and your other graphics. Is that something based on your years of experience as a mathematician, being able to do that?
It actually is sort of in my wheelhouse. It's interesting how that came to pass with climate change and these graphics, but I've always been the sort of person who loves data, and just give me data and let me do something new and unique with it. And so in the casino industry, that was pretty much what I was known for, was this sort of analyzing data for various games or strategies. And certainly in my mathematics work over the years, I started using computers and graphics more and more and shying away from the theoretical. But I actually stumbled a bit at first, and I went down a bunch of paths in the climate change world, trying this and that graphic, until I sort of found the ones that seemed like they worked the best for the audience. And that was it. Didn't they were these? What you're seeing now is not the very first things I've ever came up with. There was many blunders to begin with, but yeah, it's been rewarding to present these every day.
Hmm. Yeah, and just for example, today's graphic where you're talking about the global sea ice extent. Um, I mean, the way you presented this graph, picking the years from 1980 to today, really, that line is just plunging, and then you're able to support that, you reinforce that with your tweet. They're talking about how it's 350,000 square kilometers less this year than last, and last was, and we're 900,000 square kilometers less than the previous 2023. So kind of what was the creative process, I guess, in creating that daily graph?
So I watch this data every single day, and I'm always trying to innovate on my own ideas for myself, right? If I just have sort of a set number of graphs I put up, it gets kind of tiring.
Mhm.
And one of the ideas I've sort of gone to when there's some new record being set, is this idea of a snapshot rather than giving sort of yearly averages or long-term averages, just focusing on the day itself. And the day in the case of the graphic you're referring to is October 19th, through the year, the span of years up through 2024. And just to give that snapshot is something that just called to me in the moment. It's like, this is something people need to see. This hasn't happened before. This makes today different than other days. I actually said that to my wife. Why is today different than any other day? Which
Mhm.
has it that has a history to it.
Mhm.
And it's something when we face events as the world goes through this process of changing faster and faster, to really sort of benchmark an individual day like that this day is significant. It's not that there's this decade long or generational process. It's that today this is happening and we can see it. I think that's the force that sort of drove that particular image.
Mhm. So I've been following you for some years, and I think, like a lot of people in the environmental community, I, I got the impression that maybe in the beginning you kind of thought that presenting this information in a way that could be digested would be enough. That maybe once people could actually see clearly and graphically what's happening to the planet, to their world, that action would be taken. Am I right in thinking you might have been thinking along those lines? And
I
what's
would say
happened
not
since
not
then?
exactly.
Okay.
So my my creative process, is devoted as an academic to making information accessible, right? The knowledge does the greatest good in the public domain. And I don't have an agenda associated with it. My agenda is not to try and create a great awakening. Those people who see this information and use it to change how they live or how they view the world, that's great. And I hope, of course, I would hope most people are swayed by the power of some of these images. But I don't have a particular agenda to try and save the planet per se, more than just present truth
Hmm.
and let people do with it as they will.
Okay. All right. So I do want to ask you a little bit about the gambling
Yes,
in your history, which I find very interesting. I mean, I had a physics professor who was talking about gambling one year in casinos, and he said, well, if you go more than a statistically significant number of times, you're going to lose. And so it
right.
completely mystified him how anybody could still be interested in gambling. And I think as mathematics professor, you know that truth also. So what has drawn you? What draws you to gambling?
So first of all, I am not a gambler. I don't play in casinos. But where your professor had it wrong, and where what most people don't understand, is that there are strategies that are mathematically based to beat casino games. And all of those strategies have to do with gaining information. They're not voodoo strategies, double your wager, look for a hot table, that sort of thing. They have to do with, does the dealer expose a card? Are the cards themselves defective? And you could take advantage of for example, figuring out what card it is based on a pattern defect. Are there bonuses or perks that you can take advantage of as a player to, is there some sort of promotion that you can beat? Is there some way that you can work together with other players at the table by feeding each other information about your cards? So I had presented close to 300 individual scenarios that I've researched and done the computer simulations on. I'm still doing them to this day. I did one for someone over in Europe this morning who identified a side bet that they could beat using a specialized card counting method that I helped work with them. They're going to get a team together and go beat this casino. So this is just, I work for the casino industry. I've designed slot machines. I've designed table games. I've designed promotions. I've done marketing research for casinos. I've met with the people at the highest level internationally, consulting, develop risk analysis spreadsheets. So it all has to do with my sort of data-driven mind. And, you have to get past the point of just thinking of a casino as casinos know everything. We can never beat their games because the casino has the edge. That's true until you go one step further and say, yes, but what if I have information? And once you get information, that allows you to flip the tables.
I see. Oh, okay. I could see the interest in that, definitely. So to bring it back to climate change, you frequently post moments of doom or weeks of doom. So I'm guessing you're thinking right now the odds are not in our favor, globally speaking.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's interesting when you say moment of doom, because that is a really striking title or sort of rhetorically powerful way to lead off. But the intention there is education, right? How do you get someone to read something? How do you get them to inform themselves? So if you just say, here's an article I'm interested in, then that just sort of puts you in the middle of 10,000 other Twitter or X posters who are posting articles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to sort of have this chronicling of what I view as sort of the worst of the day from stories I've read, and posting those, it's a way of saying that this is where we are today, and also to distinguish my post from somebody who's just saying, hey, I saw this post, and put it up there. And it's important also that when I use the word doom, that there is this sense that things are getting worse and will continue to get worse. And these are just pinpointing individual times and places and situations that we can really clearly see this progress towards the most negative future happening.
Right. But there are, signs of hope. There are also positive data points, like the massive increase of rooftop solar around the world, and particularly in places like Australia. So
yeah, and as far as those sort of signs of hope, then you get into issues with Javon's paradox. Just because we're creating more energy doesn't mean that we're actually lessening our dependence on fossil fuels, right? We're finding other uses for this electricity, whether it's AI or electric vehicles or whatever the particular way we're choosing that energy is getting absorbed. What we're not seeing is that this new energy is necessarily lessening the demand for fossil fuels. And actually, solar as a particular type of energy is going through sort of the negative phase right now with sort of this massive failure of smaller solar companies who have leveraged themselves way too highly. And you can read about this sort of the bankruptcies that are going on in this industry right now. And there's a consolidation into more corporate structures, only the largest corporate, which is kind of exactly what we don't want. To have yet more mega corporations in charge of our energy supply, when the whole intention was that this should be sort of an individual achievement. So I think it's more complicated with solar than just saying that we can be hopeful because there is more solar going up. It's complicated, and there's also there's all sorts of issues with solar as well. And we could have an hour conversation about that, I'm sure, just on the manufacturing and the placement and the ecosystems and the mining and the labor that goes into and the waste from solar.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you talk about the solar companies going bankrupt, and I know that's happening in tremendous numbers where you're based in California. And that's largely a result of the changes done by the government of California, right? By Newsom's Public Utilities Commission. So I guess it's kind of a case of the governments get to sort of set the rules of this game, right? Get to decide what which is the winning hand and which is the losing hand, instead of going into it with rules that we all follow. So,
well, I would encourage you to start a moment of hope.
All right.
That sounds like a great type of. I think people would like that, as a counter to my moments of doom. Moment of hope, and if you can find that daily article, I would love to see that. I have written about hope extensively on my blog, which is, by the way, climatecasino.net. So I would be interested in what people view as hope.
Okay.
On a daily basis, what can you distinguish today that has happened that's hopeful? What can you distinguish today and simply building more electric infrastructure, alternative energy infrastructure, to me is not hopeful. And I would love to see something other than that go into that pile.
Well, might take you up on that.
I'd love it.
All right. Well, that's just about all we've got time for. We got about another minute. Is there anything you'd like to add for our audience? This show goes out to a very general audience. It's on radio stations in Ohio. So,
well, I lived in Ohio. That's where I was a professor, Athens, Ohio, for 15 years. So shout out to all my peeps in Southeast Ohio. I enjoyed that part of the state very much, in the Wayne National Forest, and just the nature in Ohio. I think people don't understand is really, truly what a beautiful parts of the state are. And of course, a lot of it is very industrial and not so much, but I like Ohio. And of course, when I was there, it was much more of a swing state than it is today.
Yeah. Ohio is pretty much swung at this point.
Yeah, it has. So yeah, that's about it. So yeah, thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
And we appreciate you folks for listening to that interview with a very interesting Professor Eliot Jacobson. And his blog was climatecasino.net. And I just wanted to say real quick, he mentioned something called Jevons paradox. And what that is the idea that the more energy efficient you become, it doesn't reduce your energy usage, you just use more energy. So, I mean, I guess we see things like that with the switch from the really inefficient incandescent light bulbs that use 60 watts per bulb down to the LEDs, which use like 2 or 3 watts per bulb. But the Jevons paradox would say that overall energy use doesn't necessarily decline, even though you've done something like that. So whether that's true or not, we actually have reduced our energy use a little bit, but it does seem to be something we've got to watch out for. All right. But something else we like to watch out for are our advertisers and patrons. So let's hear from them now.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
And we're also very grateful to the support of our patrons. And our patrons are people whom I cannot praise enough because they took the time to go to patreon.com. That's Patreon. They searched for a Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page. They scrolled down looking at some cool pictures and chose the membership level that matches their budget. And they signed up. And so now a little bit comes out of their accounts every month, comes over to us. And that's really how we can afford to keep this show on the air. And please join them. Please, we really need some more patrons on this show because, well, you know, just like everything else, expenses keep going up and we need more revenue to stay where we're at. So we could really use a patron or two. So thanks so much. And part of what we do with your patronage is we support Rebecca coming up every week with some cool little nature effect stuff. So what are we talking about this week, Rebecca?
Okay, well, since I lost my glasses a couple of days ago, we're calling this segment, What is Becca as Blind As? Although bats actually not that blind, I think they found out recently.
Oh, okay. So it's bats.
Yeah, what
Okay.
can see much better than Becca? Let's put it that way. Yeah, bats are a culturally designated scary animal for reasons which don't really make that much sense. Technically speaking, what a bat is, by definition, is a mammal with wings made from adapted forelimbs. Although that part's a little any vertebrate with wings, they tend to be made of adapted forelimbs.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just really a mammal that can fly. But it's the only mammal that can fly continuously like a bird by flapping its wings. Mm-hmm. Other mammals that can fly tend to just glide, but they can glide pretty far though. So it kind of bats have a little extra too. They're very maneuverable too. Most bats are more agile than most birds, it turns out. And they're among the most endangered animals in the world because of habitat loss and a fungal disease in North American bats. What is that, white nose or something?
White nose
disease, yeah. And fun fact, some species hibernate, other ones not so much. They're in the order Chiroptida, Chiroptera, sorry. So, yeah, this is a word that means hand feet. Chiroptera, yeah. And I was a little confused because I'd heard of the British word chiropodist, which I think is their word for a podiatrist or something.
Okay. Well,
so, but yeah, it's not the same thing. Although bats do technically have feet,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they also have long digits covered up by patagium, which is the membrane that makes up the skin that covers their wings. So yeah, being this is an environmental show, I looked up their benefits. They're really excellent at pest control. They eat mosquitoes, moths, beetles, and other insects. If you don't like West Nile, then bats are your friends, people. If you want your baby to have a normal-sized head, consider bats.
You mean West Nile virus?
West Nile virus,
'Cause
yeah.
they eat the
Not the West Nile.
right.
You know,
they eat the mosquitoes.
they
that
have
carry
no
it.
effect on the West Nile. It's still flowing. It's all right, people.
Okay.
All right. But they also help to pollinate many crops, including bananas, peaches, avocados, cloves, balsa wood, and agave, which is what you make tequila out of. They mostly in the tropics, this is going on, or subtropics of the Americas is where they do all this pollinating. They also fertilize. Their droppings can be used for fertilizer either by farmers or just by plants that are growing near where they go to the bathroom. They are also prey for other animals, so there are some animals that depend on the odd bat now and then. And they're good at all this pollinating because, especially of the agave plant, because they have specially adapted long tongues and noses that will fit in the agave plant and get to where the pollen is. So that's nice. Also, their guano can support entire cave communities because in a cave, there are no nutrients but what gets brought in. And bats are one of the main things coming in and out. And if you had to spend your whole life where there were zero nutrients that were natural occurring, hey, bat guano might start to look good to you too. No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't no matter how long I was in there, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so I looked for drawbacks of bats. Basically, they're all inconvenience to humans. They can spread disease, including rabies, histoplasmosis, salmonellosis. They also have bat bugs, bat fleas, ticks, and mites sometimes. So, you want to be a little careful. If they nest in your house, they can cause noise and odor, go to the bathroom in your attic, damage the structure. This is mostly from Rottler Brown Bat Pest Solutions. Another thing that came up was somebody called the Bat Guy's Bat Removal, which serves the entire state of Ohio with safe and humane bat removal. According to themselves, I'm not sure who monitors that, but if you live in Ohio and you have a soft spot for bats, they're an option, I guess.
Well, this is not an ad.
No, it's not an ad. No. Yeah, but so a lot of the things are just that they are a minor nuisance that has to be dealt with sometimes. They're inconvenient to humans. The diseases that they spread are probably better to deal with or to take precautions against than having to deal with West Nile virus, the disease that'll happen if we just let all the mosquitoes just breed until the air is thick with mosquitoes. So bats basically a good thing.
All right. Yay. Thank you, Rebecca. And I just want to add, I had a situation where I had to remove a bat from a house and I damaged their wing just a little bit.
Oh.
So I looked it up and it turns out that the bat wing is the fastest healing mammal tissue.
Right.
Their wings can heal like practically overnight. So if you
Wow.
slightly injure a bat's wing, it's not all bad. So okay. All right. So on to ecological news. And let's see.
I guess that makes sense because if your wings don't work in the bat world, that's not true because there are actual records of bats feeding old bats
feeding each
in
other
the colony who can't get out to eat their own food.
Well,
So
that's nice.
maybe
Wow.
its fellow batty bats would take care of it.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Okay, on to ecological news. And just a mention of a story that we're going to be working on is next month is the UN's plastic treaty that's in Busan, South Korea. That starts in November 25th, so something to keep an eye out. But our first full story, October 19th, 2024, Renew Economy. Rooftop solar reaches a stunning new record of 112.9% of state demand. And this happened last Saturday. And what happened is there was so much rooftop solar right now. This is not the big solar farms that the operational demand of the South Australian grid was negative 205 megawatts. In other words, they were producing 205 megawatts more power than the entire grid needed. The market demand was actually reduced by 231 megawatts. In other words, the amount of power being drawn by customers dropped because they were supplying themselves with their own rooftop solar. That was down 231 megawatts. Network demand was down to 194 megawatts, and they were able to handle this because during this time they exported 400 megawatts of power to the neighboring state of Victoria, Australia. So it's just yet another example that you can supply all you need plus a bunch more with nothing but rooftop solar.
Okay, what would you say about, I heard somebody the other day saying, well, they need to put more solar on roofs and not over farmland like they're doing. What is the actual percentage of where solar power is, and what do you think about the pluses and minuses about that?
Well, to get to 100%, we're probably going to need to do both.
Right.
But we can get to 40% in Ohio, according to studies, with rooftop alone. Okay. So if you start out with 40% just for rooftop and, add wind onto that and add energy efficiency, you might end up, and now that we have the superior battery technology, you might find out that if you fully do the rooftop, you don't need hardly any of the utility scale.
And, there are also parking lots, there are urban brownfields that are hard to, clean up. That's a potential thing.
That's right. And there's even roadways. A lot of countries are experimenting with taking the median between roads and just covering that with solar panels.
Or heck, you could have little roofs over the roads. It'd probably make them less slippery, too.
Yeah, a little bit of, yeah. So there's lots of things we could do like that should be done first, but there's economic pressures to do the massive utility scale.
Yeah, it's got to happen how it can happen is the thing.
But ultimately, we're probably going to need both. But I really don't like the situation where you're cutting down a forest to put up a solar panel.
It's no good. That already was a solar panel.
Yeah, that was already absorbing carbon.
It was growing trees.
Yeah, and absorbing carbon is better than just avoiding the production of carbon.
Right.
Because, again, that takes us back to Javon's paradox. As we're producing more wind and solar, we're increasing demand, which is not good. We weren't doing that. Javon's paradox wasn't really going until this whole AI data center thing came along. And so now, so the short answer is I agree, rooftop
because we
first.
really, really need pictures that look real but aren't, I guess. I don't know.
And forests for solar, no. But farmland for solar, with agriculture, solar voltaic agriculture is actually starting to show that you can do both. You can both have farm fields and grow crops and raise livestock right underneath the solar panels. So
wow.
So that's a false choice, basically.
Yeah.
All right, we got to move along here. Axios 1021 title: Global coral bleaching event is now largest on record.
Crud.
Yes, unfortunately, this is the fourth time that there's been a global, like all over the planet, bleaching of coral. And 77% of the coral in the world has experienced bleaching level heat stress, and it's been recorded off the coast of 74 different countries. That's up from just in January, it was at 50%, with 54 countries reporting coral bleaching. So in just that amount of time, it increased from 50%, half to more than three quarters. Bleaching, just to remind you, is when the coral plant or the coral animal expels the algae that grows with them symbiotically, and it's the algae that gives them their color. So once you expel your algae, then you're just white. And unfortunately, after a coral does that, it doesn't take long for them to start getting sick and die. Parts of the Caribbean are at NOAA, National Organization of Atmospheric Administration. They're at bleaching level 5, which means 100% death of all the coral. So it's not good. And it's just global warming. So take that, Trump. Again, you're wrong. He's wrong. I guess we should have said that a little more forcefully at the beginning. He's wrong when he says there is no global warming, and these coral bleaching events are evidence that he's wrong.
He's wrong about 98% of what he says, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. All right. Well, so we got to counter that with a little good news. This came to us as a press release. Like I say, I'm actually getting journalistic press releases now from an organization called blueazores.org. And the Azores are an archipelago of islands in the middle of the North Atlantic.
Is sort of off the coast of Portugal?
Yes.
Okay. I
They're
thought so.
they're an autonomous region of Portugal. And they have established a huge marine protected area. They've protected 30% of the sea around their islands. That's 287,000 square kilometers. Half of that is what's called fully protected, as in no resource extraction at all. And the other half is highly protected, so very regulated fishing and things like that. And they did this as part of the whole, there's a 30 by 30 push, which it has been widely accepted scientifically and globally that we have to fully protect 30% of the globe by 2030 if we want to protect biodiversity. So if we want to have lots of different animal species, we've got to start giving them some land. The quote from the president of the autonomous region, Jose Manuel Bolierio, our decision made through science-based process leading to the protection of 30% of our seas serves as an example other regions must follow. So some nice news from the Azores. And we're moving right along here. Next story. This is just a little local website coming out of Monticello, Minnesota. It's called southsidepride.com. Story on October 1st. And the title, NRC apologizes. Nuclear Regulatory Commission apologizes, admits Monticello reactor leaked tritium has reached the Mississippi River. And so this is a journalist. He's all upset in this story because he had reported back in April, as he was told by both the energy company Xcel and the NRC, that this tremendous radioactive leak of highly radioactive cooling water from the Monticello reactor, they had leaked 829,000 gallons of that was contaminated with tritium at the really high rate of 5.2 million picocuries per liter. He was told by both those organizations that it didn't reach the Mississippi. There was no way for it to get to the Mississippi. But, anybody looking at it objectively would be like, well, you're right on the banks of the Mississippi and you're pouring in, 800,000 gallons of this contaminated water. How could it not get there? But,
yeah.
And of course, that's the truth. It went right into the Mississippi River. And in fact, the NRC guy, Stephen Koenig, apologized on May 15th. But the reason that this is something we need to look at now is because Monticello wants to renew their operating license. And so the NRC is doing a draft environmental impact statement, and they were gathering data, and the deadline for data gathering ended August 18th. And that just also happens to be the day that they found that the tritium levels in the groundwater right next to the river exceeded the EPA drinking water standards. So, but they left that data out. They were like, oh, didn't get this in by the deadline, so we're going to pretend it didn't actually happen. But, it's just another example that the NRC constantly lies about things like these leaks and so forth. It's what really kind of makes this story amazing is that they admitted it, that they've publicly said, oh, yes, we were lying back in April.
Sorry, we lied.
Yeah. So just keep that in mind whenever, like if there's an accident at Davis Bessie or something and Victoria Bittling, the NRC spokesman, gets up there and says, oh, there's no problem. Remember Monticello. So, okay, this is an interesting story because it's being completely ignored by the U.S. media. Right now, we are in the middle of a UN Biodiversity conference. It's called COP16, and it's at happening in Cali, Colombia. The theme is, quote, peace with nature, unquote. It started on October 21st. It's going until November 1st. And they're looking at the state of biodiversity globally. And unfortunately, it's not good. Wildlife numbers have plummeted 73% since 1970. Biodiversity And one thing that came out at this conference, somebody made a presentation. It turns out biodiversity is dropping faster in, quote, protected areas than unprotected areas.
Wow.
So apparently, once you set out a reserve, there's like more poaching, and just designating an area is not enough. So that kind of puts an asterisk on the Azores story, unfortunately. In non-protected wild areas, biodiversity's dropped 1.9%. In protected areas, it's dropped 2.1%. And so what the authors of that study are saying, and what's being said at this conference, is that the problem is the conservation is focusing on the species rather than the ecosystems. So, for example, if you create a wolf preserve, okay, so you've identified some wolves, they live on, or a monkey preserve, you've found this population of monkeys, and so say, okay, there's monkeys on this mountain.
So it's like a big neon sign saying, "Hey, everybody, free monkeys."
Well, to some degree, but
Yeah.
but the basic problem is that if you just say, okay, we're going to save that area,
Right.
that doesn't save the ecosystems that the monkeys are a part of.
Exactly.
And so, an ecosystem is very complex. You've got to have water, you got to have food, you've got to have shelter, you got to have a lot of different critters cooperating to make a sustainable ecosystem. So if you just say, oh, monkey preserve, you don't necessarily end up preserving the monkeys. The amount of preserved land has increased 0.5% since 2022. There's a whole bunch of things saying that maybe some of this is ineffective, but doesn't mean we stop. It means we fix it and we improve. So that's it. That's it for this show. Thank you so much for listening, and please go put solar panels on your house. Why are you waiting? This is Joe DeMare,
And Rebecca Wood.
and we are signing off.
No. I don't want no oil, a spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing